Hello, everyone, and we are back for a brand new episode of How's the Shared Living podcast. This is episode 5 in season 6, and we'll be with you for the next few months to bring you the latest news, views, and insights from the rented shared living sectors. So, if you work in and around PBSA, BTR, co living, university accommodation, HMO, and rented later living sectors, you are in the right place. I'm Dan Smith from Verbalflow AI and Resi Consultancy.
I'm Sarah Canning from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And I'm Deanie Lee from the Property Marketing Strategists.
Let's now hear from our headline sponsor.
Housed is sponsored by Spotlight Boost on mystudenthalls.com. Use Spotlight Boost to stand out in search results and drive more leads to your properties.
We're delighted Dan and the team from My Student Halls have decided to be our headline sponsors once again. They are a really key part of the student accommodation marketing cycle. Great partners to us at Housed, and we're delighted to have them along on the journey. Also, a huge thank you to Wash Station, Utopia, and Howden Insurance. More from them later. So we have obviously had a very busy week. Great reaction to our last podcast with Sam from Viva City WeChat mini programs and Gabriel Nicklin from Tong Global, the China marketing agency. So thank you very much to everyone for your feedback on that. Do go and have a listen. What I want to talk about today to start with, though, is the deverellsmith and the Say Consulting Rental Living Salary Guide. So deverellsmith produce this every single year. It's a really good opportunity to be able to benchmark your salary across the board, and that is across multiple different sectors. And what we're seeing is that the market is moving. Now, there have been a few redundancies across university sector in particular, but also across PBSA with various different acquisitions, and I think just some general turnover. It seems like there's a lot of moving of chairs at the moment, and I think that is what this report is showing. The market has moved, but quietly. So vacancies are up, but placements are up even more. So this doesn't seem like it's sort of panic hiring. It's more sort of selective movement at the moment, and the candidates don't seem to be desperate. So anyone that I see on LinkedIn or anyone I've spoken to in particular, they seem to have a little bit more time to be able to choose the right thing. I think there's a real focus on, rather than just having a job, is having a career and the right company to sort of partner with. So yeah, it's been interesting to look at the PBSA and the BTR and the co-living side of things there. If the right role is appearing, that's when ops teams are typically looking to move. And in 2024, I think people sort of stayed put a little bit out of necessity, not necessarily loyalty. And we're starting to see a little bit more movement now. So what are we thinking in terms of the PBSA and BTR and co-living? Is the sector mistaking stability for satisfaction? Sarah, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that's the clear thing that I took out of this report as well. I think, you might read the headlines and think, well, people are staying longer, but when you start reading the verbatim comments in this report, it's quite damning in certain areas. And I think for me, the overarching, theme, particularly amongst operational teams in this, is that their responsibilities and the expectations of their roles in an operational capacity is increasing so much. I mean, I've worked in the real estate sector for a very long time, and it just seems like with Building Safety Act requirements, I think operational staff are doing an awful lot of asset management stuff as well. And it doesn't feel like their job roles, their salaries, the recognition is increasing along with all of those increasing responsibilities. And, I think that we've got to read this report and take that from it. There's lots of positive things in the report, and we'll go on to those. But I think that was the clear thing that stood out for me.
I think there's some serious encroachment there from operations onto asset management. I've seen that firsthand in doing a lot of tender processes for management operators and investors recently. And there are some seriously blurred lines here now where operators are starting to say, well, look, we're doing a lot of this asset management work already. We should probably get paid for it. And I think that is a really interesting point, that those lines are blurring between asset management and operations. So I do expect that to continue. One of the key themes that I've seen more recently on a personal level is more people in development are moving around and looking for roles as well. That is anecdotal more than anything, but it would stack up with how things are going with PBSA. You look at Unite shelving those two big assets. You look at how difficult it is to build in PBSA and BTR at the moment because of the various different reasons, from viability to the Building Safety Act to cost of land and cost of build, etc. So I think that it is becoming more difficult to be in the development scene, and therefore there's a bit of moving around there as well. Deanie, what did you take out from it?
Yeah, I just think the thing that I found really interesting was the top 5 reasons for leaving the previous role. And they all felt like something that all companies should be working on and should be doing. So they shouldn't be reasons for people leaving. It was 43% career progression opportunity. And I think that is an overriding thing that came out from the report, is that people want to see their career progression and they're not able to see that. And therefore that's probably forcing unsatisfaction, but also forcing people to move on. The other ones, 31% has wanted a new challenge or a change. 30% wanted more interest or impactful role. 28% both for better pay or benefits and better leadership or culture. So it just feels that kind of like being happy and satisfied is about having something to strive towards, to see where you're going, interesting things to work on, and culture and leadership, which are all things that are easy to solve and people should be doing. So I think, yeah, there's lots of opportunities there.
Though what I found really interesting is they asked what people's benefits were, what would entice them the most, and number 2 in that list was hybrid or remote working, and number 6 was flexible hours / 4-day week option. Now this is very, very difficult to achieve, and I don't blame any operator for not being able to appease those requirements for operational staff. But I also think that there's a balance between, if you've got head office staff and operational staff. One of the organisations I worked for kind of pre-COVID was very, very passionate about this, that there shouldn't be a divide between head office and front of house operational staff, and as soon as you start saying, well, head office staff get to work from home and they no need to be in the office, then why with your operational staff? Well, obviously they can't be, because they need to manage buildings and they need to be visible and they need to look after their residents. So I do think that's a really difficult one to kind of manage. But I do wonder, if you look at the other benefits, if actually you can't work from home because you're operating a building, and there are some other things. So for example, bonus potential was number 1 benefit that people wanted. Private healthcare and wellbeing support, that was really high up. Enhanced pension contributions, extra holiday allowance, training and development budget. Right down at the bottom was regular team socials. Interestingly, number 9 though was enhanced maternity and paternity leave, which I'm surprised was so low down. I don't know the profile of the people that responded to the survey. I don't know if that, maybe, I don't know, age-wise, most of the people that responded beyond, child rearing age, I don't know. But I'm surprised that that's so low. But you might not be able to give somebody flexible working or work from home, but actually, can you enhance the pension contributions? Can you enhance their bonus potential? So there might be a balance there, instead of just jumping to that hybrid working solution.
There's definitely a balance to be had there. And I think, as much as we may want to show flexibility to on-site teams, it needs to look like more than just saying you don't have to turn up to where you work. Like, I think this is where we have to be able to have those realistic conversations where you can say, listen, I've got a doctor's appointment, I need to head off, or I need to do the school run on this day for whatever reason. You don't necessarily need to give those reasons, but you do have to, I think, when you're operational on site, know that you're going to be needed on site. It is that simple. Like, you can run HQ staff and HQ teams remotely, no problem at all. Nido's a good example of how that was done remotely across Europe. Pan-European operator with no real sort of office presence in the end. And I think that's where we do have to find that balance, and we've got to show that career progression. We've got to show that it's more about just the salary. I think people are looking for more than that. They want a place where they can fit in. They want a place where they have that, quality culture. But I do worry when any sort of general manager, and we've done bits and bobs of recruiting in the past and presently, and it does worry me when one of the first things that a general manager or a site team person would say is that, look, I need quite a lot of flexibility. And I can say that it does worry me, because you need to be on sites. That would worry me less from an HQ team. But how do you not create that kind of two-tier culture? I just don't think you can. I think that's one of the key issues that you've got. And then when it comes to the benefits, I think everybody is starting to realize that there is quite a lot of money in real estate. And so I think the operational teams are starting to see, okay, can I become part of this LTIP, a long-term incentive plan? Can I become part of a promote structure where you make money on the profits of a sale or whatever it might be? I think there's multiple different ways that you can incentivize people long term to stay with you, to incentivize that loyalty. It doesn't have to be a particularly messy uncoupling if that person does decide to move on. But there are definite opportunities there, and it's not just about your private healthcare and your increased pension funds. I think the best performing companies out there are the ones who are able to incentivize financially and otherwise their staff to stay with them for the long term. It's really important that there is that focus on the long term here, rather than, okay, so we've got people in roles and those people in their roles are just on the treadmill doing their job day after day. Operational real estate is a career, and it's a great one. And I think rewarding people for the long term is definitely the best way to go. So I think, the flexibility is a tricky one, especially when you're on the front line, and you really need those leaders to actually take a bit of a punt. I actually see some really great leaders in student accommodation and university housing and BTR in particular, who are starting to say that and starting to really advocate for people at every level within their teams, and offering them great incentives and reasonable flexibility, but also let's be pragmatic about it. I think that's the key. So I mean, the big question is sort of what happens next with regards to what is going to be the most important thing, because we aren't an emerging sector. There's lots of talk of in the report actually of like leasing staff. I think a lot of that will be BTR and co-living. I know Novel Student used to have like leasing teams on site, and it's a very American term. We're not really seeing a huge amount of those roles in PBSA. So, who knows? But perhaps that's something that happens more and more, but who knows? Deanie.
Yeah, just when you were saying that we're not really an emerging sector, and actually almost 40% of people fell into this career by accident, I think is something we all need to look at, not only from a recruitment perspective, but also shared living across BTR, co-living, PBSA is a big sector that achieves a lot in the real estate sector, but it's still unknown. And that's not only impacting those that we need to come and work in the sector, it's also impacting those customers, end user customers, that don't know what it is either. So I think it comes back to this conversation we've had several times around, as a sector, we need to get better at marketing externally about what it is, the benefits it gives, how it's supporting the housing market and the real estate sector. And it is part of the real estate sector. And I think there's far too much separation between real estate and shared living, and we're still getting people that just stumble across this whole massive big sector and didn't even know it existed and then start working in it. So I think there's more collectively that we can do to support that.
Oh, definitely. And I know you did a bit of work a few years ago now, but focused on marketers in the sector. And I think, and maybe that's what the training that you've got is born out of. This is your opportunity to do a little bit of a pitch for your for your training. But I think what we need to be focused on is, how do we keep people? And I think that's the key thing. The future of shared living, it won't be decided by buildings. It will be decided by the people that we manage to retain in particular.
Yeah, I mean, marketing is a good point, Dan, just because there isn't actually a lot about marketing in here still. And I think that is something that we have been advocating about for years. I think there's one line on marketing. It's a relatively low salary if they're talking about senior marketeers at that level, which makes you think there aren't many senior marketeers still in the sector. So yeah, there's definitely more that can be done around marketing and getting marketeers into the sector and training them and retaining them and making them part of the kind of, making them senior strategic marketers, because that's what you need, especially in this marketplace.
I think there's another couple of things just as we've been talking that's come into my mind. One is this is really nuanced because we don't know who responded to the survey and who are working for management companies. And I think that's probably the elephant in the room, because there's so much transition around operators. I'm not sure that front of house operators can see the wood for the trees when they're being passed from operator to operator to operator. And, I'm thinking part of that conversation that is in here about lack of career opportunities, is that because there's a real disconnect between, in inverted commas, head office and front of house? Do people really understand how the business is run? And that's what Deanie and I do from a strategic marketing point of view. But are there strategic operators? I don't know. I don't know how kind of involved the operators are with, do they understand asset management? Do they understand the goals? Do they understand the strategy? Do they know who all these people are that sit at head office, that apparently, get a lovely time because they, maybe get to work one day at home and, they get fresh fruit delivered to the office and they go out and have, socials in London. Do they understand the difference between what they're doing and what the front of house doing? Because there shouldn't be any difference. You should all be working for the same thing. And if that was understood, would they see that there's more career opportunities for them in different different aspects? I've worked for and I've worked with organizations that do this brilliantly, so it's definitely happening in some respects, but I'm not sure it's happening across the board.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, I think that wraps up that. Do go and download the Deverellsmith and Say Consulting report. It's definitely worth looking at. You do need to be benchmarking your salaries at the very least. I think we're seeing less and less of those LinkedIn adverts where the salaries are woeful. I think we've called that out enough in the past. And maybe it's the recruiters that I see and know, and therefore, they're equally aware that things will get called out. But I think there is just much more momentum in the sector. So long may that continue.
And just one point before we sign off on this and listen to our sponsors is just kind of on the topic of marketeers. Deanie and I did do a piece of research about 4 or 5 years ago. It wasn't focused on salaries, but it was focused generally on job satisfaction, the kind of image of marketing within real estate. And it was super interesting. And we would love to do that again and see what the difference has been over the last few years. So if anybody would be interested in partnering with us on this piece of insight, then please get in touch.
Awesome. Now let's hear from Utopia.
Utopia is the trusted partner for high-performance asset management, cutting energy costs, reducing risk, and delivering proven ESG results.
With billions of data points and 75,000 rooms monitored, Utopia turns real-time intelligence into measurable value, protecting investments and driving continuous improvement.
Choose intelligence that delivers. Choose Utopia.
Thanks very much to Utopia, and equally thanks to Utopia for jumping on board with UK Reef as well. Very excited about the Shared Living Summit that Housed are hosting at UK Reef in May in Leeds, and Utopia are one of our key partners there. So thanks very much to the team for coming on board for that, and obviously for supporting us with Housed podcast throughout the last few seasons. So now we'd like to talk about BTR, and this was born out of the Movers and Shakers breakfast that I attended last week. So Tim Stephen from Amber extended an invite to me. I know, Sarah, you've been before as well, and it was a really interesting event, and interesting for, I think, the people that were in the room. It was very varied across the entire real estate sector, a lot of development, a lot of housing associations, some local councils, some bigwigs, and it was their 30th birthday celebrations. I think this is the 30th year that they've been going. So it's a networking event. There's various different events that Movers and Shakers do throughout the year. Some of them focused on creative sectors, some of them focused on BTR, rental living, etc. So they are very much trying to pioneer the sector, but primarily through networking events. So it's a breakfast. You turn up there, a little bit of a panel session as well. The panel session was interesting because there were people from single family housing, BTR, co-living, etc., general development, housing associations. And overall, they were trying to paint a positive picture and they just couldn't do it. I think that's the message that I would put out there. It was a little bit blind optimism, to be completely honest, especially in terms of development, but in particular in terms of BTR. I think that it is pretty tricky out there with BTR at the moment. The news is actually quite confusing. We're seeing some stories about completion and planning permission being granted here and there, but still feels like kind of doom and gloom in the sector a bit at the moment. And we're trying to work out the tone of what that looks like. It's primarily about the new builds, the new starts, that we're just not seeing people getting spades in the ground. The viability isn't stacking up as much. Savills have done a great bit of research, and they've done several different reports on this, but most recently showing that there have been more completions than starts for 8 consecutive quarters in BTR, and in London BTR starts fell by 93% between 22 and 25. That is pretty damning, to be honest, of the state of affairs of BTR. So when I'm not going to read this verbatim, but Savills effectively say, UK BTR stock stands at 132,000 completed homes, which is up 12% nationally. There are further 51,000 homes under constructions and 110,000 homes in the planning pipeline, including in pre-app. How many of those will actually get built? I just don't know. But that is going to be, I think, the biggest challenge. The market constraints, the regulatory hurdles, they've hit the entire construction industry, and you can clearly see that in this, all of the starts data that we've just talked about. And developers, they can't start because the site's either unviable with high build costs, finance costs, planning delays, regulation uncertainty. Will they bring in rent caps? What are the affordability criteria, etc.? And then you chuck in the Gateway 2 process and the building safety regulator, and how badly run that has been to date. Over 2/3 of BTR schemes that started on site in the first half of 2025 were below 18 meters. That is for good reason. And I think we really need to be mindful of that. So, yeah, Sarah, what are your thoughts? Are we starting to lose faith in BTR?
I think I'm really confused because I think, we're all on LinkedIn a lot. We go to lots of events and it all sounds very positive. You just keep seeing, planning permission granted, and that's not all the story. So I just don't, you have to dig quite deep to find the real story. And I think this is the real story. And yes, it's positive that lots of developments are being given planning permission. But like you said, Dan, are they actually going to be built? Because, and we discussed this before as well, there's effectively, people that have great pieces of land that they're not that they can't do anything with, or it's taking a very, very long time, and in that time, could something else be built that would, give people homes instead, rather than things being stuck here for BTR. The positive note, though, was about single family housing, and that 3.17 billion was deployed into single family housing in 2025, which was a 28% increase from 2024. So it meant that it accounted for 59% of all BTR investment in 2025. So what that's kind of saying is that the money's there, the positivity in the sector, the interest in the sector, the acknowledgement that it's a sector that's providing homes for people is there. Like you said, it's the construction side of things that is the problem, and the viability. And we reported a couple of weeks ago about Unite kind of having to pull out through, unviability. Is that going to be the case for BTR? I'm sure it already has been, the case in some respects as well. It's just got to be government. It's got to be, and we've said this before, are the shared living sectors shouting loudly enough to government? Because how on earth are they going to meet their housing targets? It can't all be build to sell. And I'm sure the build to sell developers are having exactly the same problem as well. So there is a big problem here. We can't solve it. We're just reporting on it.
It's viability, isn't it? And I think this is the thing. If you leave building to viability, you're not really going to get what people need. And I think this is where we're at, that actually it's not viable to build student. It's not viable to build BTR. It seems more viable to build single family housing, which is partly housing, which is partly what generally, I guess, people are used to living in kind of houses, not apartments, if we use that terminology. And I think, Sarah, that, your point there about government is that we need policy here to guide people to build the things that people need to live in that's going to be for the long term. And at the moment, that's not how we have policy driving house building. And that's going to be an ongoing issue for the housing crisis and the affordability issues that we have. It's not, neither of those are going to be solved with the current policies we have in place, I don't think.
I think the timing of it is significant. And I know that we're going to go on to talk about that in the next segment as well. You know, when it takes so long, things change. But I will leave that to talk about after the next sponsor break.
So let's hear from Wash Station now.
Wash Station proudly sponsor this episode of Housed. We provide best-in-class laundry solutions that complement your buildings. Wash Station. Smart, green, clean.
Thanks very much to Wash Station for their support. Very grateful for you jumping on board again for this season. And do reach out to them with any laundry service questions that you have, or obviously if you're looking at it for your asset. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is the new schemes that we're seeing popping up for student accommodation. Now, we're seeing some student schemes being given permission in York and Bristol. There's a few articles that have come out. But, you know, these articles are mentioning a reaction to rising student numbers. And it feels like an example of projects, you know, taking a little bit too long to get to the planning permission stage. And then by then, the market has changed quite drastically. The fundamentals have changed, and you know, they will again by the time these buildings complete. I don't think, you know, any of the planning system or anything helps at the moment. But, you know, the only way that this balance can be rectified is if older, less optimized buildings are sort of taken out of circulation, repurposed, you know, replaced with these newer, more sustainable buildings. So the net amount of accommodation doesn't change, but the students get to live in better quality accommodation. But that does raise various questions. How can the old university stock and the PBSA stock be repurposed? And how can we make sure that, you know, we do this with affordability in mind? That's one of the key issues that I think we've got. Sarah, Dini, did you see the new applications that have been approved?
Yeah, I feel really frustrated about it, I guess, because all we see is, you know, more and more and more PBSA buildings being given planning permission in cities that we know don't have full beds. You know, there are voids in those cities. So what evidence is there that those cities need more accommodation? They need the right accommodation, arguably, but they don't necessarily need more. And I do think it's a reaction of the timing, because, you know, if we were sitting here talking about probably 4 years ago, we would probably say that there is an undersupply in York and Bristol of student accommodation. You know, and that's probably where these, you know, the work on these planning permissions started. But 4 years later, the numbers of students aren't looking like where they were, and there's been a lot more developments that have come up since. So the reasons for building those aren't necessarily the same reasons as there were, you know, 3-4 years ago. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be built, but I do think that we need to look at kind of that kind of, you know, gross number of student accommodation, and you know, do we need a cumulatively increasing number of beds? Because the good stuff gets better. You know, the quality of the new stuff being built is outstanding, which leaves the older stock kind of standing, potentially stranded, you know, potentially in need of lots of fire modifications, but they were cheap. And yes, they were cheap for a reason, because they probably weren't very good. But students have been, you know, living in those buildings because they're cheap. And you take that whole layer out of a city and you increase the cost of living in that city, so less students go to that city because there's less affordable places to live. Again, I'm not saying that there's an answer to this. I'm just saying I think it's a frustration of me, of us, you know, of the sector, that we do need more student accommodation, but we need it to be the right accommodation in the right place at the right time at the right price.
Well, I guess my argument is, do we need student-only accommodation, or do we need accommodation that students and apprentices and young people, I guess, can live in? And I think this comes down to the argument time and time again that we're getting ourselves stuck in these kind of knots around homes being built for one part of the sector, where we just need homes for people. And is this part of the problem, that I still feel that despite we can see all these changes, we can see the need for more flexibility, we can see the need for affordability, we can see more people commuting when they go to university, we can see more people choosing to go down an apprenticeship route and working and learning at the same time, but yet we're not changing our model at all. We're not looking at how we can build things differently. we talk about it a lot, but I don't think that's coming out in planning applications. I don't think that's coming out in what people are necessarily designing, or they might be thinking about it now, so we might see in 5 years' time, in which case we might have moved on already. But I think this is still feels like a problem we have, that we're reducing the ability to be flexible in these buildings because we're building them for one segment of those people looking to live.
And that answers the other question, which is how can university and PBSA stock be repurposed? Well, it's quite difficult for it to be repurposed unless it's being repurposed into co-living in the traditional sense of shared flats. But if you think about, if you just build now for people, then in the future that stock can be better repurposed. We know differently now than what we did before. We've discussed this before as well, that if you have I guess a building that doesn't have lots of studio flats in it, then that can be converted quite easily into shared living, into co-living or BTR, or short stays or hotels, all of those kind of things. So I think we need to, think, we know differently now than what we did before. And like you said, Deanie, sector needs to kind of evolve in time. I do worry about those old buildings. And I do worry that quite often across the sector, affordability just means old and rubbish. And that's not the right thing. That's not where we need to put our students in that have a lower income. Obviously, that's very different in London with the London plan, and a lot of students are entitled to be living in really great quality new build PBSA because they have to, but don't see that in other segments. And obviously we do know that quite often means that the other rooms are higher in price to kind of balance that out and subsidize that in some cases. So building new isn't always the answer.
Yeah, I agree. There's a definite opportunity for repurposing. And I think Bristol's a really good example when you have a look at all of the new stock coming to market. My worry is that there's going to end up being a value gap, and some of these will be developed based on previous figures. And I think without fully understanding the occupancy or the incentives or what drives the market or the market performance to date, and just by looking at the comps and what the rack rate is, the starting rate for student accommodation in Bristol, I don't think that is going to help anybody. The council haven't been particularly quick to open the floodgates, but they knew they needed to because students were being bussed in from Newport. That's not sustainable. So you have to make sure that you have enough PBSA for the market to cope with that. They didn't have enough. The prices were too high. £350 for an ensuite just isn't sustainable, even for a studio. I'll be honest, in a lot of Bristol, that isn't sustainable. And unfortunately, I think the horse bolted there, that they didn't build enough supply. The council didn't allow for enough supply to be built at a time when the pricing was far too high. It got out of control. And then students started thinking, actually, I don't want to go to Bristol because it's too expensive. The great thing about all of these beds being built is that it's brilliant for students. It will bring down those rent costs. And there's some really big developments and some really forward-thinking developments as well out there. There's I don't know if you've seen Brabazon yet. We'll probably cover this on another episode because I'd actually like us all to go down there and have a look at it. Yeah, because it's effectively creating a new town just to the north of Bristol, near the University of West England, UWE, and there's like 900 student accommodation beds, 600 BTR and co-living beds. It's on an old airfield. It looks fascinating. So I think we will try to head down there and go and have a look at it. But obviously, the market's very different for student accommodation. So we need to think about, what's actually being underwritten, and are we making sure that we are building not within the value gap, because so much of the stock will be fairly similar. You could put any kind of operator on the front of that building, know that it will have probably social space, study space, cinema room, central laundry, and probably a load of studios. I would say a good 40% studios, at least, more likely 60%, and then some long en suites. And I think that is going to quickly fall into the value gap in somewhere like Bristol, just as it has in Nottingham, just as it did in Sheffield, just as it did in Coventry. So But I don't think any city is immune to that. It's just that some of them are in different phases of maturity when it comes to the planning departments realizing with the university that they actually need more PBSA, because Bristol has been on the hook for a lot of nominations agreements. And they've obviously had to get these nominations agreements in because it's such a popular university and university city that they want to be able to house students effectively. And I think that's been one of the key things that we've missed along the way. That actually, have we pushed students out of student accommodation because have we pushed students out of cities because the student accommodation has become too high? What can we now do about it? If you're buying now or developing now, you're likely to face a recalibration over the course of maybe the next 3 years or so, depending on what happens with the student numbers there. But those rents just aren't going to stay the same. It's going to be like Nottingham. There's going to be a recalibration or a correction in some way, shape or form. So just something to be very mindful of. That's not to scare anyone off of development in Bristol or York or any of those other cities. There are still great opportunities out there, but it is absolutely not build it and they will come. And we have to really make sure that we still have that affordable sector. Yes, repurposing some of that uglier stock, putting lipstick on a pig or whatever you want to say about it. But we have to make sure that we still have that affordable stock. So, yeah, very interesting. And yeah, let's try and get some time in to go to see Brabazon as well. Now, let's hear from Howden.
Howden is the 5th largest employee-owned business in the UK and one of the largest insurance groups globally. With over 60 years' experience, Howden's specialist education division delivers tailored insurance, risk management, and wellbeing solutions for the education sector.
They're the trusted partner of nearly 1,000 schools, colleges, universities and student accommodation providers across the UK.
Howden helps owners and operators protect what matters most, and so they are the perfect sponsors for Housed. Thank you for coming on board for Season 6.
Thanks very much to Howden and the team for coming on board for this season of Housed, the Shared Living podcast. I don't know about you guys, but I am seeing them absolutely everywhere. I think they've got offices in Cheltenham and various other places. So it's quite cool to walk along the high street and be like, fair play. They actually sponsor the podcast.
I saw one of them in Peterborough at the weekend. So that was quite exciting, spotting their logo.
So thanks very much to Howden Insurance. Do reach out to them. Whatever you're looking for from your insurance, whether it's the simple student contents insurance or it's beyond into the development and build, etc., do reach out to Howden for that. Now, one positive note to end on, because I'm conscious that, yes, that's been a bit of a struggle this week to pull out some positives there. One positive note to end on is a really interesting co-living development that Sarah visited last week. Sarah, do you want to share a bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a bit of a public apology, really, because I think we're quite, critical of co-living in the podcast sometimes, because I think, I don't know, maybe our vision of co-living is very different to what is able to be built. But we have found a really great example of co-living that is centered around a shared community and a shared interest. So the brand is called Ansol, and they have 2 buildings. They have one in Shoreditch and one in Southall. What I find really interesting is they're both co-living, but they're both different because they're really, really different markets. So you've got Shoreditch, which is, a place in London. It's just off Brick Lane, and they have 4 to 6 bedroom apartments, really, really cool kind of split level apartments. Very unexpected in London. It felt almost Mediterranean, and this kind of community that kind of opened out very unexpectedly. But what they have that connects the people that live there is wellness space. So they have space that is centered around wellness. So they have a really large sauna, and they have cold tubs. They have a big studio. They have 120 events a week in the different spaces. And this is open to the public because actually they don't have that many co-living residents living there to make it viable. It's open to the public. And they actually identified that not many people in this space use the co-working space because most people that live there are working in London and they're going to the office. So they've gone, well, hold on a minute, what can we do with this space? There's no point it not being used. And they're going to turn it into a reformer Pilates studio because that ties in with the needs of the residents and the local market. Whereas their building in Southall, it's an ex-hotel that they converted, and they have short stay as well as co-living there. So it's operated privately, and they don't have members of the public that use the wellness space there because it's much bigger. And because people tend to be working from home there or commuting to London from Southall, they use that space in a completely different way that they don't feel is appropriate to open to the public, because they have so many residents and short stays and guests that are using it as well. So I just think that they've centered on wellness as their kind of central, I guess, co-community thing. It's a theme, but they've adapted it to the different locations, and they keep adapting to it. It's been, they've been open and they're going, well, this space doesn't work, let's change it to something else. And I just think the other sectors can really learn something from that to adapt. It shouldn't, we shouldn't see cookie cutter approaches to residential living, because every market is different and the demands of the residents are different. So yeah, I really loved it. If you're in Shoreditch and want to go for the day, I think you can even do a day pass to the wellness spaces as well. And I highly recommend the vegan cafe that I very much enjoyed sampling.
I think every operator in every sector is going to start needing more of a differentiator. We know that occupancy is a challenge across multiple sectors, whether you're in co-living, student housing, or BTR in particular. And that obviously, there's nuance around that. Various different markets are performing, some performing relatively well, some occupancy is a challenge, typically where the supply pops up or there's indigestion, as you may want to call it. But yeah, having that differentiator of wellness and actually meaning that and saying, look, we're not using this space. Our residents don't actually want this space because they are, living and working in London. Why don't we do a reformer Pilates studio? We do need to get more creative across the board in residential real estate to think, right, what concessions could we have here? Or is there, a company that we could approach to say, look, we'll offer you discounted rent to put your reformer Pilates studio in here, knowing that your residents will really enjoy it. I think there's a massive opportunity there. So yeah, Sarah, I know you were absolutely buzzing after that visit. So it's definitely something that I think we'll probably see more of.
Yeah, I think the other thing to say is that the Shoreditch one, the 4 and 6 bedroom apartments are very much in that kind of co-living essence that I think we all imagine co-living to be. Southall does have studio flats, but this Shoreditch one is shared flats. So each room has an ensuite, and then they have a shared living space, and they have roof terraces, and they have outdoor space as well. And then they get to use all of the amazing wellness space as well. I guess nobody's going to force you if you live there to use the sauna if you don't want to. It's not a prerequisite, but I guess that's their hook, and it's bringing people together that probably have a bit of an interest in living well, and it could be anything with co-living. I think, they've just centered on well-being, but like you said, Dan, I think there does need to be some kind of commonality, some kind of differentiator. So yeah, Ansol might be small at the moment, but I think they're one to watch out for.
I like the fact that it also, when you're on the website, and the website's great, but it says, apply to stay. Like, it's really creating that kind of that buzz and that sense of community there, I think, so that it just feels more curated. The design looks great. I think it's another place where I think we should all go and have a good look. So yeah, really interesting one. And I think that just about wraps it up. Really nice to finish on that positive note there. I think we need to make more of a habit of that with the headwinds and tailwinds facing residential real estate at the moment. Thanks very much, as ever, to My Student Halls for being our headline sponsor for the season once again. Your support is always appreciated. Thanks very much to Dan and the team there. Do go and get your student accommodation properties listed. And of course, thank you to Utopia and Wash Station for coming on board again for season 6. Grateful for your support. And to our newest sponsor, Howden Insurance. Thank you very much for joining our roster of suppliers and partners that we work with. And thank you very much to you for listening. We'll be back next week for more news, views and insight from the rented shared living sectors. We appreciate all your messages and feedback, so do please keep it coming in. Of course, let us know what you want us to keep discussing, and do go and like and follow us as and where you listen to your podcasts. Thanks very much.